see the cloud. Okay. So Dr. Cinda Scott works for the School of Field Studies in Boca del Toro. Yeah, I remember Bocas del Toro in Panama. Received a PhD from the University of Miami, and came up with this term to describe herself, a fabu-nerd, which
yes,
extremely jealous. I wish I had thought of that before, and I might start calling myself the same thing with your permission.
yes, fabu-nerd, hashtag fabu-nerd.
And I mean, Dr. Cinda Scott has done a lot in terms of education outreach, working with students, diving, snorkeling, just all around mermaid in the ocean. And going to talk to us a little bit today about conservation and policy. So I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to mute myself. So go ahead.
Okay, so this talk might be a little bit different than the standard science talk, but I think it's important to talk about not only natural science, but how natural science intersects with social science. And so this is really kind of a case study of a national marine park located here in Bocas del Toro, Panama, where I currently am. So if I could get this thing to move, that would be most excellent. All right, hold on. I'm gonna share my screen again, but from the original. Huh. All right, there we go. Okay, so as mentioned, I work for the School for Field Studies, SFS, and I oversee the Center for Tropical Island Biodiversity Studies in Bocas. We have 10 centers around the globe, including Turks and Caicos, Costa Rica, Panama, Chile, Peru, Tanzania, Kenya, Bhutan, Cambodia, and Australia. And each center has a different focus. So what do I do? Because I really don't just float around and take amazing photos. My work as a marine biologist really includes performing surveys on both coral reefs and in mangrove forest habitats to monitor ecosystem health. And I run a study abroad program. So I have students that come for 3 months at a time, do a full semester, and they're mostly interested in environmental studies. And for many of them, it's the first time they go into a rainforest or snorkel over a coral reef. And finally, and most importantly, I work with local and national entities, and I try to figure out how we can support policies that will promote conservation and sustainable use of our natural resources here. So Panama is in between Costa Rica and Colombia, and it has a population of 4.1 million. So imagine 4.1 million people living in a country the size of South Carolina. The majority of the population, that's 50% of the population, lives in Panama City on the Pacific coast. And that blue dot that you can see there is where I live on the Caribbean coast. The country has 10 provinces and 3 indigenous comarcas. On the western side there of the country, you can see in the circle, Bocas del Toro. It's comprised of about 9 islands. I live on Isla Colón. And Panama, I call it the water country. It is surrounded by water and is the bridge between the Americas. And when the isthmus formed 3 million years ago, it separated the Atlantic Ocean from the Pacific Ocean, resulting in the weather patterns and everything that we today. So it's a really important region in the world and important in terms of its biodiversity. So that little red smiley face or pink smiley face is exactly where we're located. And as you can see, there is a marine protected area, Parque Nacional Marino, Isla Bastimentos. Every province has a baseball team, and people are very proud here. So here we go into the field. This is our center. I live here and work here, and our students come and learn and study and play here. And what we do, we take students into the field. So this is a typical class on the left-hand side, upper left. On the upper right, we might take students to go speak with guardaparques or park guards in the marine protected area. For community outreach, we might have a group of girls from an indigenous region on the island come and take swimming lessons. We've been doing that for the last 6 years. And on the bottom right is, we usually give talks or charlas to the park guards on a regular basis. It can be anything from what they want to learn to just basic coral reef ecology and regular biology of fish. So Bocas, it's marketed as a paradise, and we have everything. We've got forests, we have mangroves, we have beautiful flora and fauna, gorgeous beaches, beautiful crystal clear Caribbean water. And it's important to present that because it's going to come up later in the talk, but Bocas attracts, because of all of those beautiful things, about 225,000 tourists per year, but it's the poorest province in the nation. Isla Colón has about 9,000 inhabitants. So imagine every year, 225,000 people bombarding a community of 9,000 people. The community is made up of majority Afro-Antillanos, mostly of West Indian descent from Jamaica and Barbados. We have many indigenous peoples, Nobe Buglé and Berowunan. We have Chinese Panamanians, Panamanian mestizos, and immigrants from the US, Europe, and South America. The life expectancy of the average Panamanian is about 80 years old. However, if you are indigenous, that drops down to about 68 years old. And in Bocas del Toro, it has the highest indigenous population out of all of the region. In Panama, it's about 80,000, of which half the population is 15 years or younger. Additionally, Panama is a middle income country, although it floats between a developing and middle income country, but it has the second worst income distribution, with the top 20% of income earners controlling 50% of the economy. The divides are real, and the divides are big in terms of class and in terms of ethnicity. So what about culture? Bocas is a highly collectivistic society, and it has very tight-knit family units. There's very small town vibes. Everything is passed usually orally. The languages spoken here are Spanish, Wari Wari, which is like a patois, Nabere, which is an indigenous language from the Nobe Buglé, and English. So I think it's important to present this in a science talk, because sometimes we forget that people have to be included in the equation. People have to be included in the process of conservation. So I present this because a lot of people are just not aware of how very individualistic or collectivistic the society is in which they live. So imagine you're trying to do conservation work in a small island community, example, me, and you come from a highly individualistic society. Well, Panama has a Hofstede index, and it's a metric of culture, and one of the dimensions it's based off of is individualism. Panama has an index of 11, indicating that it is a highly collectivistic society. The US ranks at 91, which is the highest individualistic society in the world. And that has serious consequences when we're talking about, for example, how you communicate, how you express your opinion, how you classify others. So if I walk into a room and I'm trying to do conservation work with, let's say, the park guards, in terms of communication, for example, speaking one's mind is healthy in an individualistic culture. However, in a collectivistic culture, harmony has to always be maintained. So you're not supposed to voice your own opinion. You consult with others to make sure everybody's okay with that. The same thing with opinions. Your personal opinion is expected in an individualistic society, but in a collectivistic society, your opinions and votes are predetermined by the group or by a leader. And obviously, the way that you view others is important, because individuals classify other people as other individuals, but in a collectivistic society, you're classified as either being in the group or out of the group. And so I talked about this in a recent TEDx talk I did in October. If you go to the TED, I think it's TED.com, and you type in my name, it will pop up. But a lot of times people are like, well, what does this really have to do with science? And I'm like, it has everything to do with science, because I believe that conservation must be rooted in equity. And so when I have students come on program and they're like, oh my God, we get to stay here for 3 months and be in paradise. And I kind of put the brakes and I say, well, is paradise really a paradise for everyone? And as we begin our journey here, students really begin to understand the structures that are in place in which people who live here do not experience paradise. So again, this question, is Bocas a paradise? And we have major problems on the island. We have issues with trash and waste management. We have issues with coral bleaching. We have issues with overwater bungalows and people building on top of coral reefs. We have visitors who come and lift up the starfish on Starfish Beach, and it's causing problems with the population of starfish there. Other challenges that we have include, and especially from the deforestation of mangrove due to coastal development, we have serious loss of biodiversity. We're dealing with hypoxic events more frequently in the bay, and obviously dealing with issues of climate change, sedimentation, and overfishing. And so the question really is, how do we solve these challenges? And my answer is, you take government officials out to see what they're losing. And I had the opportunity to do that recently. Several months ago, we hosted the Minister of Tourism. He's sitting right behind me, along with his team in the last row there, his wife and daughter. And to the left there is Krista Shu. She helps to co-write the Hope Spot application with me. And we designated Bocas as a Mission Blue Hope Spot in 2019. So in addition, I've also registered our organization as a nonprofit, and we are now part of the Ciudad del Saber, which is a national think tank on how to solve some major challenges facing Panamanians in light of climate change. So I really believe that you have to work alongside local and national environmental groups. You can't do it alone. And you need to reach out to government. You need to reach out to other NGOs and institutions to be able to begin to solve these major challenges. So this is just a very brief case study of the National Marine Park that we have here. So as I mentioned, this is the Marine Park, and it was founded in 1988 and was the first marine park to be established in all of Panama. But the question is, who really benefits? And this is a question that I think a lot of us are asking these days, because MPAs really are a model of fortress conservation. And we know that fortress conservation doesn't really work. And we know that MPAs are really majority not effective, because not all of them are no take. And so who's actually benefiting? Is it the tour operator? Is it the local fishermen? Is it the tourists? Is it Senor Polo, who lives out in the middle of nowhere on a beach? Or is it marine life? Who's benefiting? And also we have to ask, is this marine park well designed, and how do we know? You can see from the photo, the different colors represent different ecosystems and habitats. The olive green and bright green represent mangrove ecosystems, and the pink and coral represent coral reef ecosystems. But this is a seriously odd shaped marine park, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I have been told that by many, many people, that basically they drew around communities, and that was in 1988. Well, this has serious consequences, and it has resulted in social conflict manifestations. Where you see the pink circles is where Bocas del Toro has been mentioned in this particular paper as having a social conflict. And this was a paper that looked at, I think, maybe 50 different countries, and Panama was included, and the marine park in Bocas was included in the study. So what you can read from this is there is a great inequity in who gets to benefit from this marine park. There's a lack of trust. There is an inequity in the distribution of benefits. It has caused food insecurity. There is illegal fishing. There's conflict. You have pressure from tourism. And of course, there are major interinstitutional conflicts between government agencies. The government agencies here are highly regulated, but they don't speak to each other, and that causes downstream issues. So my message is that conservation requires people, like all people. And this was an event that we held where we brought the tourism police sitting there in the front, that's Sergeant Sanchez. We have fishermen, we have the park guards, the woman in the pink there. She is in charge of the women's cooperative on San Cristobal. We have the Ministry of Education is present. We have we have to bring everybody together to talk about these problems. And so some things that are weighing heavily on my mind lately is, how do we build greater equity in ocean science? How do we make sure that all of the people are represented, not just the few that are able to make those lines and build a park? And how do we build equity into our models and frameworks for conservation? Because conservation ultimately is rooted in neo-colonialist attitudes and objectives. And when you look at fortress conservation models, which MPAs fall into, you can see that there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and the models themselves need to be reevaluated. And how also do we make sure that equity and equitable sharing of natural resources are measures of effectiveness, that we put those into the model actually? So here in Bocas, not only do I work with local and national entities, but I also do a little bit of research with my students, and I study mangrove habitat complexity. So we go out and we basically measure complexity, the physical structure of a habitat, using habitat assessment scoring. And that scoring is based off of 6 different characteristics: holes and hiding spaces, rugosity, height, live cover percent, hard coral percent, and variety of growth forms. And then in the different regions that we go to, we can compare them using statistics to see which areas have higher complexity and thus likely higher biodiversity. So my question is, how do we protect complexity? So this is a photo I took near mangroves, and it's wildly complex. This is not simple. And the marine protected area, what I'm asking is the current marine protected area able to protect this level of complexity? And I'm not going to go through all the stats today, but we did look at 3 different study zones. The red is close to town, the blue is within the marine protected area, the yellow is far away from town and outside of the marine protected area. And we discovered that the greatest complexity of mangrove habitats is found in the zone 3 in yellow. And that there, it's outside of the marine protected area, and there are issues with the marine protected area in general. And, one could argue that it's not even a real park because it's not enforced and a lot of the rules are not being met. But that zone 3 area is really where we have the highest levels of complexity. So the more complex habitats are outside of the MPA. How can this be, and what does this mean? Well, I asked earlier, is the MPA well designed, and how do we know? And the answer lies in the fact that we don't just need research and science. We need communication. We need all people involved. We need better policies, and we need the environment, right? We need to study the environment. And the question is, how did we really get here? Why do we have models of conservation that really don't work? And that has everything to do with intersectionality and modes of privilege in conservation. Who has access to nature, to education, to law and governance, and having your voice recognized, access to travel, and of course, that very core issue of implementing your individualistic values over a collectivistic society. That is a major issue. And I think we can do better. And I think we need more young people involved in this process, because we have a lot of MPAs established, but they're not doing well. And we need people to go back and reevaluate. So just to conclude with some positive solutions, we have to know where we stand. We need to complete assessments of the current MPAs. We need to determine the level of efficacy. We must include Indigenous knowledge, and we have to understand what practices are culturally important, and assessing the cultural, the social, the economic practices. We need the science to support many of these changes, and we need sustainable financing of marine protected areas. That's an issue that a lot of times is just completely overlooked. So I believe that conservation must be rooted in equity, which will lead to more diverse ideas and will ultimately provide solutions that reflect and respect cultural differences to avoid a lot of those social conflict manifestations. And so here, a lot of my work recently has been focusing on working with the Bocas Hope Spot. This is an alliance of many different organizations and government entities, including the Authority of Tourism and the Ministry of Environment here in Panama. And I recently wrote an article in Waterlust about how we can go about changing the narrative in conservation and marine science. So I encourage you all to go and check that out. And if you want to join in and help to build equity in ocean science, I encourage you to visit my website, cindaseas.world. And thank you.
Thank you so much,